Welcome to week 2 of English 5. This week we're going to begin our exploration of the concept of assessment. There's only one video this week, in addition, of course, to the unit planning video, but there's only one video associated with assessment. Next week we'll take a look at 2 additional videos dealing with assessment, one on how to design discrete tests and quizzes, and one on how to design an effective language task. This week we're going to take a look at the concept of what basically is assessment and what do we mean by the concept of formative assessment, which we've been using, or I've been using, throughout the curriculum videos. Okay? So again, I don't think I need to tell you anymore to download the study guide to follow along. This is your note-taking tool. It'll be very, very helpful. Hopefully you've done the pre-assessment quiz to get to activate your prior knowledge, and make sure that you do the post-assessment quiz by Saturday. Okay? By Saturday. It has to be done. If you don't do it by Saturday, you can't take it. Okay, let's start. I thought this was a good graphic because assessment, it gets a lot of people's minds working in different directions. The gears get oiled, get going. You as a teacher, of course, have to look at the concept of assessment. How are you going to assess effectively? Your headmasters look at the concept of evaluation. Are you a good teacher? Is this a good program? The inspectors look at a form of assessment by looking at and deciding if this is a good school, if this is a good department. And of course, students are affected by assessment, and it really gets some of their minds reeling. You know, some students will be like, oh, I'm not really good at tests. Well, we're going to find out that assessment doesn't necessarily mean a test. It could be a lot more than a test. But tests are one thing that we could do. So I thought this was a really cool graphic to get us going. So let's start by really looking at, what is assessment, what is evaluation. So what I'd like you to do is to stop the video, and I'd like you to go to your study guide, and I'd like you to answer these 2 questions. What is assessment? What is evaluation? Do you think that they're the same? Do you think that they're different? Once you have done that, please restart the video, and we will move on. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you were able to define these terms based on your prior knowledge. By the way, folks, this is a type of a formative assessment, getting the students to think about and answer a question before you introduce the topic. That's simple. So what is the difference? Well, here's a very formal bunch of definitions. Both assessment and evaluation involve the process of gathering or collecting evidence or information. In assessment, we're gathering evidence of student learning. In evaluation, we're collecting information, and then we're going to make a judgment about it. So for example, in evaluation, inspectors come in and they literally evaluate your program. They collect lots and lots of information from your school, and they determine from that information if this is a good school or if this is not a good school. That's evaluation. Assessment really focuses on the students, and it's what you're going to be doing. You will assess your students every day, every lesson. You'll assess them at the end of specific periods of time, and maybe in the form of an exam or a learning task. You're going to use this information that you collect to make instructional decisions. This is critical. If you give your students a little quiz, let's say, on the irregular past simple verbs, and they all flunk it, well, it's not necessarily because they haven't studied. It could be that some of them have not studied, okay, but it could be that somehow the teaching got misguided or messed up, and therefore you need to reteach, revise, revisit this topic. That's an instructional decision that you need to make. You pre-assess to determine if the students have the prior knowledge. If they don't have the prior knowledge, you have to give it to them. If they do have the prior knowledge, then you can move on. So this is all the tools that you use as a teacher to collect information about student learning and instructional effectiveness. You should then, at the end of your year, or halfway through your year, whatever the case may be, at certain benchmarks, you should evaluate your own teaching program by collecting all the information, homeworks, evaluation, assessments, tests, quizzes, lesson plans, unit plans, whatever the case may be, and determine, is my course going in the direction I want it to go? Am I meeting the standards that I'm supposed to be meeting? Then you have to adjust based on that information. So you will assess and evaluate, but different things. You're going to assess the students to make instructional decisions, and you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of your own program, your own teaching, at benchmarks, at periods of time throughout the course of the year. Usually, evaluation occurs at the end of an assessment cycle. So, for example, if you give a December exam, that's a good time to start to do an evaluation process. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Are my students learning what they're supposed to be learning? And if the answer to that question is no, then you need to change something. And that's important. You don't just keep going. You have to change. Let's take a look at the purpose of assessment. Here's a nice diagram I got from a course that I took out of New Zealand. Assessment is defined by its purpose. First, we have to determine, is that purpose useful or not? Some teachers design assessments that are not useful whatsoever. I mean, why do we have them? You have to look at it that way. I mean, and that's what the whole concept of the unit plan was too, that you have to link those assessments to your desired results. If there's no link, it's not useful. It's irrelevant. And if it's irrelevant, it's bad for the students. It could be inaccurate. It could be ignored. Why do that then? So you don't want your assessments to fall into that purpose. If they are useful, well then, are they summative or formative? And that's what we're going to talk more about. What is the difference between these two? And then we're going to talk more about formative. And notice what it does here. Summative is a way that we use to evaluate schools and teachers, and a way to assess our students. So summative can be an evaluation, and it can be an assessment. Formative is much more an assessment. We use it because it improves teaching. Why? It's descriptive, and it's valid, and it's reliable. And we're going to take a look at those terms in more detail next week. Those are important terms when it comes to designing an assessment. Is it valid? Is it reliable? And is it descriptive? Does it give us useful information? And also, we have to then, with that formative assessment, we have to give feedback. Feedback to ourselves. What do I need to change? What do I keep doing? And feedback to the learning process, to the students. This is what you're doing well in. This is what you're not doing so well in. You need to work on this. You're okay with this. Students need that feedback all the time. All the time. You have to give them constant feedback. That's good, that's good, that's good. Oop, let's change that a little bit. So this is an interesting diagram to follow. Now, again, looking at these three categories, improvement, that's the type of formative, so it helps teachers improve the teaching and helps students improve learning. So this section just summarizes those main areas a little bit here. The concept of accountability. That means that we evaluate and certify students, that students can move on to the next grade, students can graduate, students can whatever. And also that we evaluate the quality of schools and teachers, which is what inspectors do and what headmasters should be doing on a regular basis. And then the concept of if it's irrelevant, then it's rejected because it's bad for teachers and students. Okay, not because bad. Sorry, a spelling mistake there. And if it's ignored because it's not needed. So, but some teachers design assessments like that. In this this little diagram here, This little diagram here allows you to look at yourself and say, which category do I fall in? Do I believe that assessment is for improvement, accountability for students, or accountability for schools? Or do I actually think that assessment is truly irrelevant? I hope none of you truly think that, but we'll see in just a second. Because, and the thing is that it can be because of your cultural differences, what society thinks about assessment. So let's take a look at two examples here. New Zealand teachers were compared to Hong Kong teachers. I told you I got this information from a course I took from a university in New Zealand. And basically, they gave them a survey that talked about, do you agree, disagree, strongly agree with certain statements. And the thing is that they found that New Zealand teachers truly felt that there was a stronger link between assessment and school accountability and student accountability and improvement. Okay. But interestingly enough, Hong Kong teachers really saw even a little bit stronger link between improvement and school accountability. That there's a direct link between student accountability and improvement, where New Zealand teachers saw more of a link between school accountability and student accountability. And that's based on the culture and what they believe. So it'd be interesting to find out, what do Belgian teachers, what do Flemish teachers really think about assessment? So what I'm going to ask you to do is, again, to stop the video in just a second, and you are going to find this little survey, an abridged version of what they used in New Zealand, to think about assessment. So what I'd like you to do is it's just take it, print it out, take it and bring it to class with you, and then we'll see, where do you lie? Do you think that it's more improvement? Do you think it's more school accountability? Do you think it's more student accountability? Do you think it's more irrelevant? Answer it honestly, based on your own feelings. I'm not saying whether you're right or wrong with something. I'm just asking you to look at it and determine, for each one of these statements, and I think there's 27 of them, please choose one of those boxes, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay? Notice there's no middle of the road. You have to agree or disagree. One way or the other here, folks. Okay? But how strongly do you disagree or agree? That's sometimes will be the key. So do this, please, and print it out, bring it to class, and we're going to get a sense of where we lie as a class as a whole. Okay, so assessment is often, the way it's viewed is often determined by society's views. And sometimes society's views change. In America, over time, how we view assessment has truly changed from one of school accountability and student accountability to more improvement. There's much more focus in America on assessment that is to improve the learning process than for the other two. And that's a major shift from even when I started out teaching. So it can change over time. Society's views can change based on the research and the information that they're provided with. All right, just to see how everything's linked, we saw a little bit of that in the last video on unit planning. But you're setting your goals, your objectives, you're mapping those learning opportunities, we're doing all that. And then we're assessing those goals and objectives. And then we're analyzing the results, and we're using that data to improve what I'm doing with those goals and objectives. So you can see that assessment fits into this real circle, this loop of how we should be teaching. We're always starting with the objectives, basically, but then we're using the data to help us inform, did I meet, did I not meet, do I need to do something else? Very, very important. And there's 7 principles you should keep in mind when thinking about assessment. And in your study guide, for each one of these principles, I'm asking you to try to apply it to your situation, either as a learner or as a student teacher at this point. Frame meaning performance goals with summative assessment. So if we want the students to perform, that should be summative. That should not necessarily be formative. Whenever you're assessing the students, whether a performance language task, show the students the criteria and models in advance. Let them see what it is they need to do. Let them see an example of it. Sometimes you have to create examples. Sometimes you have to you can use examples that other students have created. Assess before teaching, pre-assessment or diagnostic testing. We've talked about this at length. It's still a major, major principle. And I'm wondering, have any of you ever done that? Have you ever been in a situation where you were pre-assessed or had a diagnostic? What did you think about it? And have any of you done that as teachers? Offer choices. Not all the assessments have to be the same, or the way the students take the assessments don't have to be the same. This is that concept of differentiation again. Offer them a choice every so often on how they want to do their performance or how they want to be formally assessed. Maybe you got a group of students that just love the thumbs up, thumbs down. Do it a little bit more often. Maybe you got another group of students that prefer interactive whiteboards. Use that. We talked about this earlier. Provide feedback early and often. Early and often. Provide feedback every day to the students if you can. You guys are doing great with this, but you need to work on this. Provide individual feedback as early and as often as possible. Encourage self-assessment and goal setting. Let the students self-assess themselves. How do you think you're doing? It's easy to end every single lesson with, how well do you think you understood the material here today? Hold one finger up for not well, hold all 5 fingers up for I understood it perfectly, and any number of fingers in between, just don't hold up the middle finger. That's a quick self-assessment. Students have to think about, do I really understand that? They should do that. You should do that. And allow new evidence of achievement to replace old evidence. Do any of you have a driver's license? I was wondering, those of you that do have a driver's license, did any of you fail your driving test the first time around? I did. And you know what? What's nice is when I went for my test the second time around, my first test didn't count. I mean, if they had averaged my first test with my second test, I probably would have failed the second time. I mean, it wasn't perfect. Okay? So in that case, the Department of Motor Vehicles replaced my old evidence with my new evidence of achievement. How often do we, for example, if the students are studying the irregular verbs, you give them a quiz, the students fail, then you give them another quiz, but then you average the two together. What kind of incentive is that? What kind of reality is that? We don't really do that. They know it now. Give them credit for knowing it. That's what's important. Assessment determines whether you know something or you don't know something, not how many points you've gotten. And when we talk about the concept of reporting, you're going to see how I feel about grades in total. And I'm not in favor of them whatsoever. But if we're averaging, I'm even less in favor of that. If we've got to give a grade, yeah. If you give them a test and then give them another shot at it, you know what, guys, it would be like if you have to sit for a set in the second exam period. If I took your first exam and I averaged it with your second exam, some of you would have to sit the whole year over. I mean, that's not right, is it? They're replacing the old evidence with the new evidence. That's good. We should be doing more of that as teachers. Okay, now we're going to move into the concept of formative versus summative assessment. So basically, formative assessment is that assessment for learning, to help students learn better. It occurs before the end of a lesson, before the end of a unit, before the end of a period of time. It's the assessment that's happening during your class. It is an evaluation of the current status and generation of feedback during the learning process. You know, what good is feedback if it comes after you've taken the test? You can't use it, especially if they're not offering you a resit. So you need to give students this feedback. You need to generate it, and the best way to generate it is to do some sort of formative assessment. some type. We're going to talk about all the different types, and you're going to see some of the types in the sample lesson. Summative is the assessment of the learning. It occurs at the end. The feedback is at the end is for the development and the purpose for the purpose of establishing worth or quality. So how good or bad is something? This is very evaluative in that sense. So they're very different. Summative is, for example, if you're giving an exam in December, that's summative. But all those quizzes and all that you're doing up to that point, those become formative. They should go back to the students and they should be able to determine, oh, I know this or I don't know that. But quizzes aren't the only way we should do formative assessment. So they're very, very different. The rest of this video is going to focus on the concept of formative, and we're going to take a look at summative a little bit later. And we're going to actually look at the concept of tests and quizzes as in between formative and summative in the video, then actually the next video, and then summative in the second video in this next week. Okay, so again, we've looked at this. Here's a cute little infographic. It's in your study guide, so you can take a look at it there. It's also loaded up in Toledo separately as a graphic. It just compares the two. So again, another way. Formative is used to check the student's understanding and to plan subsequent instruction. Summative is the assessment of learning, provides teachers and students with information about how much knowledge they've attained or what their attainment level is. We use the information gained from formative assessments to help us in instruction and help teachers and students consider additional learning opportunities. What more can I do? Remedial, revision, extended. Summative often results in a final grade. And the higher the grade, the better you did. The goal, basically, of formative assessment is that we feed it into our instructional model, and it allows for students to be responsive to their needs. So we're responsive to their needs, the students become responsive to their needs. It really, it's all part of that reflection process too. It helps the students see, I need to really work on this. When you're preparing to study, you shouldn't have to study everything for the final exam. You should study what it is you don't know as well. Chances are, if you are studying everything, you're spending way too much time on the stuff you already know and less time on the stuff you don't know. Formative assessment helps you to see that. The goal of summative assessment is to evaluate the student learning at the end of an instructional cycle, okay? And then use it to compare against the benchmarks. Could be at the end of a unit. It could be at the end of a period of time, like a trimester or a semester. But you then compare it to those standards and to see how the students are doing. Are they getting the standards they're supposed to? These are just some examples. We're going to take a look at more down the road. Okay, so you can take a look at this when you get a chance. Here are some broad categories. And the thing is, you're going to do an activity in class. You're going to look specifically for some types of formative assessment. But there's different types. You can do observations. You can concept checking via correct questions. You can hold discussion. You can make constructive quizzes, okay? Quizzes that actually give good feedback. You can use something called an exit or an admit slip or a check-in or a check-out slip. Something that you can use it at the end to assess what have they gained. You use it in the beginning to see what prior knowledge they might have. You guys hate the vocabulary journal, but learning logs, learning journals, they're very, very critical to helping you see what the students are doing. I do agree that maybe if the vocabulary journal was set up a little different, then it might be much more useful as a formative assessment tool. Assess each other, assess yourselves. Graphic organizers, getting students to use different types of graphic organizers, and there's a ton of types of graphic organizers for comparing, contrasting, similarities, differences, whatever the case may be. It's important that you probably think about how I can use these more effectively in my class. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I love that. More visual representation. Practice. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Practice role plays, practice presentations, whatever the case may be, and then use them to give feedback. Especially like role plays and things like that. It'd be great, guys, if you get the students to record them, and then you can use that recording to give real-time feedback, because it's hard to give feedback in a speaking assessment. Four corners, where you can have a day before a test and say, as you're getting closer to your exam, let's say in December, you can do a day where you have this corner is I know it, this corner is no, I'm okay with it, this corner is I'll probably do fine, this corner is I really don't know it, for different topics. And students move around the room as you change topics, working with different activities to help them build up their own. But there's a bit of self-assessment in there. There's a bit of reflection in that. Kinesthetic assessments, we're going to take a look at some of these as well, getting the students to move up. For example, having the students make questions by giving them big words and moving around. Those things can be very helpful. Individual whiteboards or chalkboards, letting the students give them a question and then have them write it on an individual whiteboard or chalkboard, or using the technology to do it. We've already seen that with EverySlide.com. You can do some of that. I'm going to show you some other tools later this semester as well. Appointment clocks. For example, before you start class, tell students, okay, I want you to set up an appointment that you're going to have in 15 minutes with somebody in the room. And then that becomes their appointment buddy, let's say. And then you do some teaching, and then they have an appointment with their buddy to talk about it. So it's not always necessarily that they're working with the person next to them. They got to think about who might be good at this topic, who can I work with that might help me, or who can I help. Think, pair, share, so those cooperative learning strategies that can be very, very important. So we're going to take a look at these as we look at sample lessons, or I do different lessons. For example, I'm going to do a lesson on text adaptation, and throughout it I'm going to use formative assessment techniques. Your job will be, can you identify the formative assessment techniques? What were they? How effective were they? And also learn the information about text adaptation at the same time. So that's an introduction to formative assessment. We're going to work with this throughout, so this is just an introduction to it. Next week, like I said, we're going to work with the concept of testing quizzes. How do you actually create effective testing quizzes that bridge formative and summative assessment? And we're going to take a look at summative assessment more closely, specifically the language task, which is the type of summative assessment that we should be giving. Okay, so I'll see you in class on Thursday. Bye.